So welcome everyone. I'm Nick Hirschon. I'm a journalism professor here at William Patterson University. I'd like to thank you for joining us for our first installment this academic year in an ongoing series of discussions with professional journalists. These conversations are sponsored by the Communication Department and the William Patterson chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, a national organization that advocates for journalists' rights. I serve as a faculty advisor for our chapter, and before we start tonight, I'd like to just make you aware of some big news that we have over the summer. We found out that the Society of Professional Journalists held its annual Excellence in Journalism Conference in San Antonio, Texas. And at that ceremony, our William Patterson chapter, which we call WPSBJ, was designated the most outstanding campus chapter in the Northeastern United States. Oh, wow. So that means that we beat every other chapter. Thank you.
That's great.
Exactly. Take that, Vermont. We beat every other chapter in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Central and Eastern Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So I just want to take a moment to recognize some of the hardworking students among us today who helped WPSBJ grow into one of the top student journalism organizations in the country. If you can give them a round of applause, because you saw Olivia Beal is our president, Anthony Baymundi is our vice president, Leslie, who just came in, is our secretary, Priscilla is our publicity chair. So thank you, guys. And so moving forward for tonight, I'm going to begin our conversation with questions that I have for our guest, but I want you as the audience to be involved too. So as Olivia mentioned, you can ask questions via social media. We invite you to tweet your questions using the hashtag WPSBJ Reality Check. I know it's a mouthful there, but WPSBJ Reality Check, okay? And we'll put up those questions on screen in the second half of the discussion tonight. And thank you to Priscilla for curating the tweets and Rod Holiday Dante for running our tech in the back. And that brings me finally to my guest. So Gilda Rogers is a journalist who has written for the Asbury Park Press and Industry Magazine. She served as the managing editor of an African-American weekly named The City News. She has written 3 books: Arrested Development, The State of Black Achievement and Education in Hip-Hop America, Fearless, A Bold Approach to Reinventing Your Life, and Out of the Ashes Came Hope, a memoir written with the Reverend William Lindner, the founder of New Community Corporation in Newark. Gilda is also a playwright, that's something we'll get into tonight, and she works for the Two River Theater in Red Bank. We're going to be talking especially later on in our conversation tonight about her role as the vice president of the T. Thomas Fortune Foundation, which operates a cultural center in Red Bank in the home of a pioneering African-American journalist. So please join me in welcoming Gilda Rogers to William Patterson University.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Of course. Well,
glad to be here.
Thank you for coming. So I'd like to begin by asking you why you decided to become a journalist. I was looking at your career, and I was going to kind of take a stab, as you're thinking about it, I'm going to take a stab at kind of answering my own question here, because it seemed to me that you have a true appreciation for public service. Yeah. I noticed that at one point you worked at Red Bank Regional High School as the director for the school-based youth services program that offers students and families access to social service programs and counseling. So I know for me, a big appeal of journalism was public service. I don't know what it was for you, but why did you decide to become a journalist?
Well, I really decided to become a journalist. It was kind of by, I won't say accident. I had a career prior to journalism as a fashion coordinator, window dresser for some major department stores, which I did that for about 15 years. And then I was abruptly laid off from our last position. They got rid of the entire display department. And I've always been a person that loves learning. And while I was going to school for fashion, I remember my English teacher saying to me that I was a good writer. I never really saw myself as a writer, but she said that to me and it kind of stuck in my head. So when I was laid off, I could have gotten back into the whole fashion thing, but I made the decision that I wanted to try something new. I'm always looking for my next adventure, so to speak. So I thought, maybe I'll try my hand at writing. And then I went back to school to get a degree in writing English with a writing emphasis. I started out at Brookdale in their journalism program, and it just flourished from there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and what would you say is your philosophy as a journalist? Because I was reading one profile about you in the Two River Times, and I thought this was interesting. It mentioned that you had a section of a Maya Angelou poem that was up on your refrigerator, taped to your door. It says, "I love life, I love living life, I love the art of living." Is that a way that you view journalism?
I love people. And I think in order to be a journalist, you have to have an appreciation and a love for people. I love stories. I love hearing people's stories. As a journalist, you are trained to listen. Most people like to talk and hear themselves talk, and but I'm interested in what people have to say. So that part of my training as a journalist came easy because I enjoy listening to people, but I love life. Just like the poem by Maya Angelou says, I love living life. I enjoy, just everything that, comes my way in regard to the experiences I have, be it good, bad, or indifferent. I think that I grow from that. My writing grows from that. So I have many sayings that I love. One being by Jackie Robinson, who says, "What good is a life if not to be of service to others?" So that is really my philosophy, is that, I want to be in service to others, and writing is my vehicle to do that.
You've certainly done it in a lot of different ways. We were going to talk about journalism, but theater writing and your self-help books, and you've kind of covered everything. But one of the positions that you had, I wanted to talk a little bit about. You were the editor of an African-American weekly named The City News. I don't know much about The City News. When I started in journalism, I actually was an intern at the New York Amsterdam News, an African-American newspaper in Harlem.
Okay, yeah.
Was it a similar focus?
Absolutely. The emphasis was on the African-American community, those stories, those issues. And that's what drew me to the newspaper, was because prior to that, I was working at the Asbury Park Press. I actually started working at the Asbury Park Press while I was still a student at Brookdale. I went to their career services department to register and asked, if anything ever comes up in journalism, please let me know. And that led me to the Asbury Park Press. And then I enjoyed, obviously, working at the press because I was there for probably about 5 years. But then I really felt a strong urge and a yearning to really report and talk about issues that were impacting the Black community, and that led me to City News. First, I was the associate editor for City News. Also had another publication called Yes Magazine. And so I started off at Yes Magazine and then rolled over into the managing editor position for City News. And I really, really enjoyed that a lot.
So I want to get into maybe the differences between writing for a mainstream publication versus something like City News where you have a targeted audience. But you mentioned starting out the Asbury Park Press. Our next reality check speaker, Andrew Ford, is an investigative reporter now at the Asbury Park Press, so that'll be neat to have him come to campus next month. But you started out covering sports, I saw.
Yes.
And I thought that was really interesting because I was reading a lot about you and I saw you have tons of interests, art, theater, issues of importance to African Americans. I didn't see a lot about sports. So a lot of beginning reporters get saddled with beats that maybe they don't really want to write about. Is that kind of what happened, or how did you get to cover sports?
Well, like I said, I went to the career services at Brookdale. And so one day they called me and said, Gilda, we have a position up at the Asbury Park Press in the sports department. It's taking scores from high school teams, sports teams. They call into all the newspapers after their sport is over. When they finish playing, they call in to let us know who won the game, what the stats were. So I was just merely going to the job in the evening. I worked from like 6 until I think 12 at night, just answering the phone, taking scores. And that parlayed into a writing position within the sports department because I am a sports enthusiast. I love sports. I learned a lot from being in the sports department about different sports, which was like tennis. I didn't really know anything about, and I was assigned to go cover a tennis match. Had never been to a tennis match in my life. Didn't want to tell my editor that I didn't know anything about tennis. And on my way to the tennis match, I called my brother, who is a tennis fanatic, and had him come with me to the match and tell me what to write and how the game was played. So I learned tennis on the fly. But just, I enjoyed the energy in the sports department. And then that parlayed into me at some point having my own column with the, it was called Gilda Rogers in the Community, where I covered scholastic sports, different high schools, Long Branch, Red Bank. My real major beat was basketball. Then I got the assignment to cover the WNBA in its inaugural season. I think it was in 1997, I think, somewhere around there, to cover them. So I would go and cover their home games. So because I really love basketball. So that was a great fit for me. So sports kind of just, it was just kind of organically happened. And I loved it.
Yeah. What did you find were some of the differences between covering sports or maybe as a neutral reporter and then when you had a column? Were there differences in what you felt you could say or how you approached it?
Well, the column, you know, was gave me the opportunity to be a little bit more flowery with my writing, as opposed to just getting the facts and just reporting on an event or a game or whatever that happened. So I did a lot of profiles on people that were related in some way to sports. It could be a coach, you know, it could be a student who was excelling in something where I was able to expand on, you know, some of their human interests, stories around them, as opposed to just reporting on the sport itself.
Right. Well, and then we were talking about you were at Asbury Park Press, you went to the City News. Were there differences that you saw in how issues were covered, especially maybe issues in the African American community, that, you know, anything eye-opening about the changes, the way they were covered with those two different papers?
Well, it was an emphasis on African American community. That's kind of how I wound up with the column, because someone called to the Asbury Park Press to say that the Asbury Park Press sports department was racist. And I was the one who answered the phone, and they conveyed this to me. And I went into my editor's office, who I knew was not a racist at all, and told him that he couldn't understand why. And I said to him, at that particular time, Long Branch was like tearing up the basketball court. And I think they went on to win the state and finals and all of that. But the Long Branch high school team was not getting the same coverage as, say, a St. John Vianney or, you know, some of the other schools, St. Rose. And I just told him my opinion, that I thought, you know, I know this department is not racist, but it's not giving any attention in the manner that it does to some of the other schools. And that's when he said, well, you have yourself a column now. So, you know, go cover the African American community, sports-related issues and things like that. And that's how that happened.
Wow.
And in working at City News, it was a great opportunity because it gave me an opportunity to really get close to the community and really bring those stories to the forefront, you know, about businesses that were developing in Newark at that time, to, you know, NJ coming, all kind of things like that. What the African American community was involved there in some of the things they were doing with NJ. That's how I really met Monsignor William Linder. That's how I found out about Fortune. Was I found out about Fortune, T. Thomas Fortune, because under my leadership as the managing editor, we won the T. Thomas Fortune Award.
I saw that, yeah.
And I had no idea who T. Thomas Fortune was, and had to do some research to find out who he was. And that kind of started this whole journey that I've been on for like 20 years almost, finding fortune. Yeah.
And you made an interesting point before about maybe the Asbury Park Press did not consider their coverage to be racist, or that they didn't have racist motives, but in what they are not covering, they are showing that they're preferential.
I think it is so important in the newsroom, and I know you know that, to have all different voices in the newsroom. Otherwise, we just, seem to gravitate to our own experiences, and whether it be intentional or not intentional, and forget about other communities, all right? So that's why you'll always hear that it needs to be real diversity in a newsroom, because you want to make sure that you are giving ample coverage to all communities. And sometimes in mainstream, that is the difference. In mainstream journalism, as opposed to me just deciding, you know what, I want to work for an African-American publication, because that kind of voice wasn't being reflected in mainstream papers.
Right, right. I think it's just an important point. And as all of you go on to your careers as journalists, or for those of you interested in journalism, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are trying to be racist. It's just inevitably because we don't have that viewpoint. So unless we have diversity in the newsroom and always are thinking about how can we,
all voices matter. We have to, pay attention to all cultures, all stories. We all have some common interests, but those differences are important to highlight in everyone's culture. And so that's why newsrooms have to be staffed with all people, so that it's balanced. It's balanced coverage, and everybody's voice is out there and it's being heard.
Another interesting part about your education, you earned a master's degree in history from Monmouth University. So I'm a historian myself, and I love the study of history. Did your understanding of history inform your journalism in any way?
That's why I pursued a master's degree in history, because I thought it would give me a nice frame of reference to write from. It would make my writing deeper and more meaningful, because I had somewhere else to go to cover a story or to write. And I always, ever since I was a child in elementary school, I always loved history. Always loved history. So it was just a natural fit for me. I didn't feel like I needed to get a master's in journalism. I think once you learn the mechanics of writing, and you challenge yourself to be the best writer that you can be. And that's not to say you shouldn't get a master's in journalism or communications or whatever, but for me, history was just a natural fit for me, and I thought that it would have a tremendous impact on how I wrote my stories. So that's why I loved history.
Yeah, I think history is one of those subjects, political science maybe too, that go like hand in hand.
Yeah.
With just understanding how things got to be where we are right now, how people work, how people think. So I thought that was great. As we kind of move on to other aspects of your career, I just wanted to get your kind of opinion on what is a journalist, because some of the work that you've done is straddling that line. There's the traditional idea of a journalist is neutral, objective, and doesn't give any of their opinions on facts, tries to keep analysis to a minimum. There's another thread, and I think T. Thomas Fortune fit in this, and maybe you do too, where it's a little bit more on advocacy and including the insights that you've gained through your reporting, through your work. Where you come down on what is a journalist?
To tell the truth. I think that's the job of the journalist, is to tell the truth, to report the truth. To my experiences have been that I've discovered things about myself through journalism that I want to advocate and be an advocate, an activist. I want to speak truth to power. I want to influence others in some shape, form, or fashion to be involved in their community, and why that's important, and why it's important for us to give voice to the voiceless. That has always been a significant part of why I write, and that is to give voice to the voiceless. I just think that one of the most rewarding jobs you can have is to be a journalist, because I have met and so many people from all backgrounds, to high places, to low places, and it has allowed me to become selfless in who I am and how I try to give back to my community. It serves me in so many ways. I mean, it's not, yes, I'm a journalist, but out of journalism comes public relations. So out of that, that's how I wound up at Two River Theater, working in their, with their marketing department. I have met so many people along the way that I'm really, really connected. So people access me because they know, oh, Gilda might know so-and-so or might have a connection with that person. So it's made me, my skills more marketable. Mm-hmm. It started out strictly as writing stories, but it has developed into me becoming an activist. It has developed into me becoming a publicist. It has developed into me becoming an author. It just, it just keeps on giving. That's what it does. Journalism keeps on giving. That's what I think it does.
I mean, it can go in so many different directions, and so I want to talk about some of the many directions you've taken with journalism.
I want to say I'm always looking for my next adventure. I enjoy life, and I think we do ourselves a sad service if we don't try to wring everything out of life that we can. If we stay, segmented or, monotone or, narrow in our scope of who we are or who we can be in this world, then you're denying yourself everything that you can do and can be, and you will surprise yourself. So for me, it's been a joyful experience to be a journalist. It's been one that, I met Maya Angelou. I actually met Rosa Parks. I went to, when I worked at City News, they called us, the NAACP of the state of New Jersey, called City News, the African American weekly newspaper, instead of calling the Star-Ledger, to let us know that Rosa Parks was coming to Newark International Airport because she was going to be the speaker for their statewide convention. Wow. And gave us that scoop. So I was able to go to the airport, meet Rosa Parks, and while I'm at the airport, I met Dr. Maya Angelou. She was there. And so it just is amazing where this career can take you. So I can't think of a more interesting career to have. It's what you make it. You can settle for just being a beat reporter, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I just wanted to do and incorporate all sorts of things into that journalism umbrella.
Mm-hmm. And just, for students, I hope that everyone knows who Rosa Parks is. But
we all know who Rosa Parks is, right?
We do? Okay. So when we're talking about meeting people like Rosa Parks or Maya Angelou, how do you handle it as someone who may be such a fan of theirs in a way? You certainly learned about them, but now you were job is to interview them and get information and not fangirl in front of them. What do you do when you're in that situation?
I'm just being myself. I'm interested in, in what gave them the courage to do certain things. So at first it is a little intimidating. It is, you still are a fan. Mm-hmm. And it's, with Maya Angelou, she actually had to calm me down because I couldn't believe that in one day I met these two great individuals. And, I just ran up to her because, she had a very unique voice. And I heard her voice in the airport. I put my bag down. This was before you had to go through security and all that. And I heard her voice. And when I turned, there she was. And because she was one of my favorite writers, I dashed right there. And, it was like, and her, she just grabbed my hand and said, baby, just calm down, calm down. And then, I told her, I'm here to meet Rosa Parks. And, she told me, well, give Rosa my love and told me to keep writing and things like that. And eventually she did, I calmed down enough to have a civil, conversation with her. But I think on some level, when you meet these kinds of people that you read about, you hear about, and you might even enjoy yourself, it's kind of hard sometimes to separate that fan from the journalist, but it's human nature, it's human nature. But I eventually came back to myself mm-hmm. and was able to conduct a conversation with her, and then to meet Miss Parks. And by that time when I met Rosa Parks, because I saw Maya Angelou first, I was all right. I was back to my professional job.
I'll tell you, I have a Maya Angelou story myself. So when I was a reporter at the Daily News, I worked there from 2005 to 2011. And my alma mater, St. John's University, had a little bit of a controversy because Maya Angelou's grandson was graduating, and she was in the audience at commencement, but they didn't ask her up to speak. And instead they had the president of the university speak. And so people were like, the president of the university over Maya Angelou could have spoken. And then it came out, well, it was a Catholic university and she has some positions that are pro-abortion rights, so maybe that was one of the reasons why. But I found out the story on Deadline. I figured, you know what, I'm going to throw up a Hail Mary. I'm going to try to get an interview with Maya Angelou. And I called her office and they said, oh, you sent us a fax. It was like back in the days when you'd send a fax. Fax her, the questions, we'll see. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to hear back. And then at like 4 o'clock, like an hour before Deadline, I hear her voice on the phone, hello, I'm calling. And it was just it's stunning. It's like hearing like the voice of God saying like, hi.
You're taking it back.
And then she read to me one of her poems, because I said to her, if you were to have given the commencement address at St. John's University, what might you have told those young graduates? And she, off the top of her head, she just started reciting a poem that she had written about young people and their dreams and everything. And I'm like, I'm on the phone right now with like one of the greatest poets of all time who's reading me, her poetry.
Yeah.
Which is like one of those, wow, how did I get here?
Wow moments. And those are the moments that really enrich your lives, and make you feel as though that, anything is possible in life. I tell my own students, anything is possible. Don't ever think that you can't be or become or do. You can. And that's what makes life and living so wonderful, because anything in life is possible. Yep. And I've had a lot of those kind of moments. At the Asbury Park Press, I did a major story on the Knicks when Pat Riley had left and Don Nelson came. And then Don Nelson called me one night, because I had put out, you call their people and then one night he called and, we had a great conversation on the phone. So it's nice to be able to just hear from these people and speak to them and talk to them. And you get to see that many of them are, just like you and I, their names are just more out in the ether than ours. But it makes life interesting.
Sure, and just to think about the heights that we can soar to as journalists.
Absolutely.
And one of those heights for you, so you're the owner and CEO of Frank Talk Multimedia Network, specializes in linking the arts, culture, entertainment to a community. You have a show named Frank Talk. Has it changed now? Okay.
Yeah, I used to have a show called Frank Talk. I used to do it from Brookdale. And so, again, you must take risks in life, or you'll just be stationary. I'm not afraid to take risks. Maybe I've taken too many, but everyone has landed me onto something. And so one day I just decided I was going to open a bookstore. And I called my bookstore Frank Talk because while I was studying history at Monmouth University, I used to read the work of Stephen Biko, who was an activist from South Africa. And when he had to go underground during apartheid, and he couldn't write or speak out anymore, he used to write a column. And at the end of the column, he would sign it Frank Talk. And I said to myself, if I ever owned something, I would call it Frank Talk. And so one day I'm just walking down the street, it was an empty storefront, and I looked in there and I was like, I think I'm gonna open a bookstore. And so I opened a used bookstore, named it Frank Talk. It was like a little, the emphasis was African American culture. I had a gazillion books, so I had enough books to go in there and get it going. And that's how the television show came about. Because then someone from Brookdale came to me and said, Gilda, would you be interested in doing a show, like a half an hour show through Brookdale Television? I was like, yeah, well, what is it going to be called? They said, Frank Talk. So I was like, oh, okay. So, that happened. And that's how I got to Two River Theater. Because then people started covering the bookstore because I was having a lot of events and activity was going on. I was getting a lot of press from the newspaper about it because it was a different and a unique space in Red Bank. And people used to say it reminded them of a place, something in Brooklyn, which I thought was a great compliment. And one day the marketing director came to the store and wanted to know if I could help her, because Two River Theater had just recently opened, if I could help her publicize a play that was coming, which was a one-man show, and he was African American. And I was like, sure. And then she came back, another time. And then finally one day she said, would you work with us for the season? And I was like, wow, because I was pretty much a one-man operation at my store. And I'm like, well, I can't really do both. But again, looking for my next adventure, I was like, well, you know what? Maybe I'll close the bookstore and then work at Two River Theater and see what that brings. So I had the bookstore for about 3.5 years and then closed it and then started working with them since 2008, and I've been there.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about your time as a talk show host, as an interviewer, and since we do have a lot of broadcast journalism students, since I'm interviewing you right now, it's a little bit intimidating to be opposite somebody who's already done this so many times. But what are some tips that you might have for people who are going into broadcast journalism, who are interviewing? What about stage presence or just anything that you've
Well, first of all, you need to really do your homework on whatever it is that you're going to be talking about and to whom you're going to be talking to. And I was never trained in broadcast journalism. It just fell in my lap. And so I just went with it. Just getting comfortable with the camera, being on camera, and just being myself. And I think when you're yourself, you're gonna make mistakes. You just edit it out and you do another take. But the most important thing, I don't care whether you're a broadcast journalist or a print journalist, is to do your homework. You can't really fake that. Knowledge will, supersede maybe some of the bumbles that you might make. So that would be the best tip that I could give, is to do your homework, bring all of who you are. People receive authenticity well, so you don't want to try to be like someone else or try to imitate someone else. You just need to be who you are. I know I have a delightful personality. So, first of all, it's recognizing within yourself, what are your strengths? What makes you you? What makes you interesting as a person? And once you tap into that and that's what you roll with. And so that's what it's been my saving grace, is me just being authentic to who I am, being true to myself, understanding the importance of being prepared. When I go out to do an interview, and that's so important, and then just to bring all of yourself to it. And that's probably the best advice that I could give you guys.
That's terrific. I want them to get a sense of what you're like as an interviewer, so I'm going to have Priscilla start pulling up a clip for us.
Oh, really? You have? Oh, my God.
And I'll introduce this a little bit as they're pulling this up.
I hope it's a good one.
Well, it's a clip from an interview you conducted several years ago with Cissy Houston, the soul and gospel singer who is also the mother of Whitney Houston. So this interview took place not long after Whitney had died in 2012. You have something you want to say first?
Yes, let me tell you about that interview. That was a very, very difficult interview. First of all, she lost her daughter in the tragic manner that she had. And this was, I think when I interviewed her, this was in 2013, I believe. Mm-hmm. It was a couple of weeks before Whitney was to turn 50, or would have been 50. So, and her mom was very, she was tough. She was very, very tough. And in the beginning, she was really hard for me to break through, to really engage her in a conversation, because she had her guard up, wanting to not share or bring all of herself to the interview. And something happens, and that is when the magic happened. I hope that piece is there. When everything just fell to the side, and then we had a great, great, great conversation. I know what it was. I said to her, I feel comfortable calling you Miss Cissy. In the Black community, you always call people Miss So-and-so or whatever. And when I said that to her, she said, well, you can call me Dr. Houston. So I was like, oh, okay. I said, that's cool. I said, so I addressed the audience. I said, let me tell everybody something. I said, I went to a book signing. I went to her book signing. This is how I got the interview. I went to a book signing that Cissy Houston was having in Elizabeth somewhere, I think it was. And so when I got up to her with my book, I said to her, I had just been at a book signing with her niece, Dionne Warwick. So I said to her, I met your niece, and I tried to give her some small talk, and she just looked at me like, and what does that mean? Like that. So I addressed the crowd with that. And once I did that, she said, she said, no, I didn't say that like that. And after that, all of that defense that she had just melted away. So sometimes, you know, she kind of caught me off guard, but then I had to find my footing. You have to be able to think fast on your feet too as a journalist. So then I was able to find my footing and be able to tell the audience that story, and then brought it back to her. And she was like, no, I didn't treat you like that. And I was like, yes, you did too. And then from that point on, she was fine. We had a great conversation. It was one of the most delightful, you know, interviews that I've done. You know, I can say that I've done. So yeah, this is.
So we'll play a clip from it there. I know the moment you're talking about. This is a little bit, I think, after that when you start getting into delicate questions, maybe about losing her daughter, and so we'll play that, and we'll talk on the other side about what you did there.
And like yourself, Whitney started singing in the church. You write in the New York Times best-selling book, Remembering Whitney, My Story of Love, Loss, and the Night the Music Stopped, that you were really hard on her when she decided to be a singer. So how so?
Well, just singing is not an easy thing. You have to, you know, really be real about it. You have to really want to do it. And in order to do it properly, then you have to learn the proper way of doing it. And it's a lot more to singing than just opening your mouth and doing, you know, and everything comes out all right. It takes a while to learn where to breathe from, where to sing from, because you have 3 or 4 different places in your body that music comes from. Yeah. And you usually use it all if you're a real good singer.
And so I mentioned that is delicate in the sense that this is only a year after her daughter has died. You're asking her about being tough on her daughter growing up. So even though maybe the question itself doesn't sound that way, like it's a pretty...
Oh, we got into some good discussion even about, you know, drugs and that, and she did an appeal to the, you know, young people, telling them, you know, don't make the same mistakes. First of all, I had read her book. I read the book from cover to cover and was prepared with the questions that I wanted to ask her. And obviously sometimes, you know, the interview could go in another direction. But as an interviewer, you have to be able to bring it back to, you know, where you wanted to go again. But she was very candid. She was very candid, and you know, we had some moments that, you know, were really wonderful because she was, you know, she was herself. She was, you know, at moments lively, you know, chuckling when she was reflecting on her own career, because what it was, I did not want to make this about Whitney Houston. I did not want this interview to be a Whitney Houston interview. People didn't recognize that Cissy Houston herself was a 2 or 3-time Grammy award-winning artist, all right? She was the founder of a group called the Sweet Inspirations, and they were a backup group for everybody you can imagine, from Elvis to Aretha Franklin, you name it. The Sweet Inspirations were the backup singers. So I wanted to really shape this interview around her and to make her the star of that evening, not her daughter. Obviously, her daughter had to be a part of it, and we talked about it. But it was about her talking about her own career as a gospel singer, how, you know, she comes from a family called the Drinkards. That was her maiden name, and they performed at the Newport Jazz Festival. You know, she had who was it? Trying to think of one of her love interests she talked about. So you have to really get an idea of what it is that you want to discuss. I did not want to make this interview an interview about Whitney Houston. That was not the purpose. I just wanted to, I was hoping to shed some really light on Cissy Houston and her own claim to fame, to let her know that, you know, she was an important figure in this music industry. If it had not been a Cissy Houston, it would never have been a Whitney Houston. So we have to give due, just due where it should be. And so that was the premise of my interview, was to really delve into her book and her life, you know, as a singer, as a musician, and someone who happened to be the mother of this person that we all grew to know and enjoy and love.
That's terrific. There are a few other things that we had said that you've done outside of traditional sorts of journalism. First is, some of the books that you've written. You self-published a book with two co-authors named Fearless, A Bold Approach to Reinventing Your Life, a mixture of self-help and narrative about women of color taking control of their circumstances. So what drew you to long form, and do you view that as kind of an extension of journalism in some way, serving the public good?
Well, it was because all three of us who wrote this book together, we all were journalists. We all are journalists. And at that particular time, we all found ourselves out of a job. And we made a pact to come together and form what we called a board of directors, where we actually wrote ourselves into what our next experience was going to be. But we had to find a focus to be able to do that. And so we were discovering what it meant to be fearless and taking a bold approach to a new life, you know. So that just, it was our way of reshaping our own lives, finding ourselves outside of, because journalism was changing. It wasn't the same journalism that we had grown up in. And we found ourselves now on the outside of it. Now, how are we going to stay current? You know, how are we going to get work? What are we going to do? And that's when we decided that we would form this board of directors. And if one of us would say, oh, well, you know, no, I don't feel like coming together today. No, we didn't miss a meeting. We stayed on point and we worked through it. And at the end, we saw our lives change and be able to move on to something else. So sometimes you just have to, I don't know, just dig deep within yourself and figure it out. And that was us figuring it out. Right. That's what that book was about. And with the hopes of bringing a message to those who read it that would help them to figure their lives out as well, if they were looking for some kind of new beginning.
You also talked about your role with the Two River Theater in Red Bank, and you're a playwright yourself. One of your plays, Supernatural, details the pressures that African American women face to bend their appearances and hairstyles to meet conventional beauty standards. I know that I've had a few students over the last few years who are interested in studying that topic about African American beauty. What does it mean? How does your theater then relate to journalism or an extension of journalism?
Well, because I work really in their marketing department, so I'm part of their publicity team. I'm a consultant. I don't have an office there, so to speak. I'm on my business card, it says community relations. So I'm always out in the community, discovering new ways to either bring the theater out into the community or to bring something into the theater, you know, that maybe they, I feel as though the theater could benefit from, particularly covering communities of color, all right? Because we want to make sure, again, that we're being inclusive of all people at the theater. And so I think that's how I serve the community, you know, through my many, many connections from having been a journalist for all these years. I know people they don't know, that they need to know. And so I'm able to connect them with those, you know, folks or organizations, and it's helped them to become one of the, you know, Two River Theater was recently voted one of the top 10 places, this regional theaters to see a play by the USA Today and Huffington Post. So we've been doing a really good job of being very inclusive in our stories and what we bring to the stage. And I'm delighted to promote what they do because I believe in what it is that we're doing.
One of the main reasons that I had wanted you to come tonight is to talk about T. Thomas Fortune as well. And again, all connected, all of these things are related. I know that we're going to start going pretty soon to student questions, and a lot of them have questions about your work with the Fortune Foundation. But just to catch everybody up to speed, so life of T. Thomas Fortune, African-American civil rights activist, writer, and journalist who lived in Red Bank from 1901 to 1908, and you've been involved for several years in a historic preservation effort to save the house where he lived, which had been abandoned since 2006. Your group stepped in, I think, about 2013, and Fortune, I find to be a fascinating figure in American journalism history. He was born into slavery. He was freed by the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Let's just think about this. A journalist who was actually born into slavery and then freed during the Civil War. And for more than 20 years, he oversaw the country's most influential newspaper, most famously known as the New York Age. So tell us, first off, how did you come to learn about T. Thomas Fortune? I know you mentioned that you had won that Garden State Association Award with Fortune, and yeah.
We won the award when I worked at City News, the T. Thomas Fortune Award. Like I said, I had no idea who T. Thomas Fortune was. Many people, and I think it's a sin and a shame that most journalism programs don't bring Fortune to the forefront of their curriculum because he is such a formidable force in journalism, in the Black press, but in press in general. So when I was introduced to him, this is just synchronicity in how life works. If someone had told me I would be doing this, what I'm doing now, I would say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But as life is, a mystery, to be discovered. So I find out who Fortune is back in 2000. I go on to get a graduate degree at Monmouth University in history. I'm doing work, and it was a house in Red Bank, a big Victorian 1850s Second Empire style home that I would ride by because I live in Red Bank, and I would say, wow, that house probably was really something in its day, right? Just admiring it. And then while I was working on my graduate degree, I did some research work over at the Schomburg in New York. And while I was doing the research work there, that's when I discovered that Fortune lived in Red Bank. Mm-hmm. And then it made me think, I'm like, I wonder if he lived in that house. And by this time, the house was boarded up. The last people that lived there, after Fortune and his family lived there, they lived there from 1901 till about 1911.
Right. He moved out in 1908 because they separated, and then the family lived there.
And when I was, admiring this house, and then the family that came after Fortune was an Italian family, the Vaccarelli family. The Vaccarelli family owned that house from basically after the time the Fortune family left until 2016. So they had the home was in their possession for over 100 years, all right? They signed off. The home is actually a National Historic Landmark because of Fortune's contribution nationally. So the last people in their family to live there was in 2006. And then this is around the same time that I'm, finishing up my graduate work and all of that. And, I'm discovering this house, and now I know that he lived there. And then the councilman in Red Bank and the chairman of the Historical Preservation Commission in Red Bank approached me one day because they had the house listed as one of the 10 most endangered sites, historic sites in New Jersey. And then that's when they said, Gilda, this house belonged to, and when they said T. Thomas Fortune, it was like I already knew it, but they just confirmed it, because after I discovered that he lived in Red Bank, I would often wonder, did he live in that house? And then they came to me that day and said, you know, if something's not done, this house is probably going to be demolished. And me being a journalist and understanding that Fortune was a journalist and just how badass he was. And when I say badass, I mean that with a capital B and a capital A. He was a badass. And I'm like, this just can't happen. And the family had actually went and filed for a demolition permit. And once they filed for a demolition permit, I was already engaged in it before 2013. Okay. Another young lady who knew a lot about Fortune, she and I started doing things like at the community center in Red Bank, we would have these events where we would talk about Fortune and try to make people know who he was and all of that. And then when I discovered that they were really seriously going to tear the house down, I'm like, this just can't happen. It can't. First of all, it's only one of 2 National Historic Landmarks in the state of New Jersey that's devoted, National Historic Landmarks that's devoted to African American heritage. So how do you tear one of those down? The other one being Hinchliffe Stadium that's in Patterson. Okay. That's the other National Historic Landmark where the Negro League used to play. And I did a great story when I worked in sports on the Negro League, so I knew about that. But back to Fortune, that can't happen. So then I formed a group, and we started a campaign called Save the T. Thomas Fortune House. And we had bright yellow lawn signs all over town, wherever people would let us put them in their yard to say, Save the T. Thomas Fortune House. And then we just started going out and speaking anywhere that people would have us, libraries, schools, churches, people's homes, and just trying to make people aware of who Fortune was, why he was important, and why this house needed to be saved. And we started to get, momentum and a buzz, and people will always say, why is it that I never heard of him? And I will say, exactly. He gave W.E.B. Du Bois his first writing job when Du Bois was 15 years old. We all heard of W.E.B. Du Bois. He was the ghostwriter for most of Booker T. Washington's work. We all heard of Booker T. Washington, He was one of the founding members of the first Black political successful organization called the National Afro-American League, which in 1890, which was a precursor before the Niagara movement and before the NAACP. And those things we've heard of. He was an editor for Marcus Garvey's newspaper, Negro World. We've heard of Marcus Garvey, but no one, the average person, if you ask them if they've ever heard of T. Thomas Fortune, they haven't. And so I just felt like because he was a journalist, I'm a journalist, he spoke truth to power, that I was going to do everything within my power to make sure that that house was not torn down. And through the grace of God, it happened that we were able to save the home and to make it even just a unique situation. It was a lot of ups and downs and hurdles because we were trying to raise money. We would never raise enough money to be able to rehabilitate and restore the house. We were $20 fundraisers or whatever. So then the state stepped in, and the state was going to buy the property under their Green Acres program, but then we would be responsible to restore the house. They were just going to save it from being demolished. And then the Vaccarelli family rejected their offer. So then now we're back to zero money again, because I saw that as our money. And at that point, I knew we had did everything within our power to save that house. I said to a friend of mine, I remember it distinctly, one night on the phone, I said, "It's nothing else that we can do. I'm just going to turn it over to a higher power." And then 3 days later, I got an email from a gentleman named Roger Mumford who asked to meet with me. And I went to his, because he wanted to talk to me about the T. Thomas Fortune house. He had Googled T. Thomas Fortune because he saw all of the little signs. He Googled, and my name came up. He got in touch with me. I went to his office, and he said, "I think I may have a solution to your problem." I was like, "Yeah, what?" He said, "What if I buy the property, restore the home, and deed it back to your organization for $1? I almost fell out the chair. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Because this aligns with my values." Now, he was a white man, a white developer. But during this time, when we had these signs and everything going on in our campaign, was when people like Eric Gardner was being murdered, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott. It was during that time when all of these African-American men were just being shot down, killed. And he said, I feel as though I need to do something. He said, I didn't know what it was that I could do, but I think if I could restore this house and your organization run it as a cultural center to bring people together, you know, that is what I would like to see done. And I was like, that works for me. Mm-hmm. And that's how it all happened.
So I want to play a video. Thank you for telling us that great story. I want to play a video that will give a little bit more impact. So we'll get that video going in a second. This is from a clip NJTV ran in January where they interviewed you and Roger. And some of my students have already seen this. But I just want to play that, and then we'll go straight to some questions. So remember, guys, if you have Twitter, you can play that.
This is actually a dream come true.
It's something Red Bank resident Gilda Rogers fought and hoped for, but wasn't quite sure if it would happen. The restoration of the T. Thomas Fortune house.
T. Thomas Fortune was a premier journalist of his time during the late 19th century, early 20th century. He was a social justice crusader. He used the bully pulpit of his newspaper, the New York Age, to speak out on injustices, particularly for African-American people, but for women and all people.
Fortune, who was born into slavery, lived here in the early 1900s. We first met Rogers in 2014. She and other Red Bank residents launched a campaign to raise awareness and funds to buy the National Historic Landmark, which had fallen into disrepair. Then she got a phone call from builder and developer Roger Mumford, who said he wanted to purchase the property, restore the home, and deed it back to the nonprofit, the T. Thomas Fortune Foundation. And you said,
"Are you for real?"
I think what intrigued me was I appreciated the historical significance of Thomas Fortune. People don't realize that he was an intellect 150 years ahead of his time. Secondly, it occurred to me that if I needed to find an economic use to underwrite this significant expense, that I would craft the entire community in the theme of Thomas Fortune.
Mumford built a luxury apartment building behind Fortune's home. The historic property will become the T. Thomas Fortune Cultural Center. Construction began in December 2017. It's expected to be done soon, February, just in time for Black History Month. The public will be invited then for a preview open house. The Fortune Foundation expects to have all the exhibits in place for their May grand opening. The home is full of original pieces, like the stairs and railings, and exact replicas. Though Mumford is more than pleased with the craftsmanship, he says he's really moved by what this restored house will mean to the community.
I think the main source of satisfaction for me is I think most good people want to be on the right side of history. But at the end of the day, to participate in a process that underscores the importance of having a more inclusive and tolerant society is something that I'm proud to be part of.
Though it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, for Rogers, the holiday is also about celebrating the life of T. Thomas Fortune.
Martin Luther King, this is what he wanted us to live in harmony. Fortune, he started that work. He's actually been called the bridge to the modern day civil rights movement. So he bridges, he was the bridge that leads us to Dr. King.
In Red Bank, I'm Lauren Wonko, NJTV News.
Before we go to student questions, do you have any thoughts watching that video?
Roger, he and I, we've become great friends. He is a great humanitarian. He had the means to be able to do something that could change the course of how people connect with one another, and he did it. And I think this project serves as a model for others to do these types of things. We have to learn, or no, not learn, we need to understand how are we to be our brother's keeper. Obviously, we have segments of our population that are in dire straits. And I could go on a tangent about that, but I won't. When we talk about the 1619 Project and learning about, slavery and the impact that it has really had on African American people. And for Roger to step in to say, you know what, this aligns with my values. This is what I stand for, and this is something that I know that would be good for this community to help bring people together. To me, that's what life is all about. We should be, we should, in our own small way, because maybe everybody doesn't have the means as a Roger Mumford does, but in our own small way, we can be our brother's keeper. And too many of us stay isolated from one another. It's not affecting me, so, well, oh, well. No, it's not like that. We're all in this together. And we have to start uplifting those. That's why being a journalist to me is one of the most rewarding things that I chose for myself. And that was to give voice to the voiceless, to help. And that's my way of trying to be the best person or to be my brother's keeper. So I charge all of you here tonight to find it in your own special way of how will you impact someone else's life that might be, a marginalized person or down and out, because you never know. I tell my students all the time, I said, don't look down at people. Everybody has a story. You don't know what that person has been through that maybe caused them to be in the situation that they're in. So don't be pompous and think that it can't happen to you, because you don't know what's down the road for you and what's going to bring you to your knees one day. And you say, I never thought I would be in this situation. So we should always be trying to find ways to help, not to judge, but to be of service. Be of service to others. Just like Jackie Robinson said, what good is a life? What good is your life if you're not being of service to others? If you're not doing that, then you're just being very selfish. And that's just my humble opinion.
No, it was frank talk. No, thank you. And let's just, since we're going to start wrapping up, and I want to make sure that the students have a chance to get questions in. I know they tweeted out some questions, so if we can throw up some of the questions there. So I guess you
It's
could.
great how you guys do this.
Yeah. So here we have a question from Ashley. How do you think T. Thomas Fortune would feel about today's media and the blurring lines between fact and opinion?
Oh, that's a good one. He was about telling the truth, and the way things are now, you don't know what the truth is, it's just so much coming at you. I think you have to, for Fortune, he was in a class by himself. He was considered very militant and radical, and sometimes that is how you have to be. People might look at you strangely because you are of that ilk, but that's what separated him from some of the others, that he had the courage to say what others wouldn't say. So I think you have to be courageous. He was a courageous person, and courage, he writes a poem. Fortune, he was a poet too. He wrote a poem that says, "There is no death. I will live again, even when I'm dead." And that's prophetic, because now we are in his house. We have brought him back to life again for people to really know him. And he wrote that poem in 1903. So I think in today's blurred lines, I think you have to have the courage today to speak out, whether people agree with you or disagree with you, and tell what the truth is, what you know it to be, not an opinion, but to really, that's why it's important to really learn, to be knowledgeable, to understand the world that you live in, to really know history, political science, those disciplines, because it gives you some insight in the world that you live in, so that you do start to develop your own thoughts and ideas about what is real and what is, just nonsense.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered the question.
No, I think
You just got to have courage. You got to have courage today as a journalist. I think you need more courage now as a journalist than maybe years before, all right? Before all of this fake news entered into our lexicon, now it's even more imperative that you step out with courage to say what others won't say, and let the truth be your guide. Just let the truth be your guide.
so. Let's try to get to a few more of these. We have one from Alan. How can T. Thomas Fortune and the Foundation set an example for news outlets today and in the future?
I think, well, the foundation, which I'm a part of, we just opened up an exhibit Saturday called Afrofuturism. Has anybody ever heard of that phrase? Okay, young lady in the back has. I would, ask that you all Google that. Afrofuturism is seeing the world through a Black lens, all right? If I can really just explain it really quickly, it's an extension of the Harlem Renaissance and Black aesthetics. Be it literature, history, architecture, design, graphic arts, the future. Where is the future for those people of the African diaspora? Where is this headed? The Black Panther movie, how many of you saw a Black Panther movie? All right. That movie actually, launches what now everyone is talking about, Afrofuturism, but the term itself really goes back to 1994. But it's really seeing the world through a Black lens. All this time, we've not seen the world like that. We've seen the world through a very European-shaped mindset. And in that world of Wakanda, at the end of the movie, how it was a society where people all came together. And that is what this is all about. You know, we have to make this world more equitable for all people, particularly people of color who have been oppressed throughout the history of this nation. And so what Afrofuturism is saying is that, you know, we're really pushing. T. Thomas Fortune was an Afrofuturist. All right, so I'm telling you to look up those terms because he was pushing the boundaries of what it means to be Black in America and what we can do, you know, our creative, you know, our intelligence, you know, our knowledge to be a part of this thing called America and to have our place here. And it's many other Afrofuturists. It's taking the past and bringing it to the present and then to the future. You'll see Malcolm X with like this helmet on with some superhero helmet figure. I forget who his name is. But so it's really just trying to reintroduce these figures to a new generation of young people to see them in a different way. You know, in a more futuristic way that aligns with maybe someone you've seen in a graphic novel. Mm-hmm. It's science fiction. Get Out, the movie Get Out, Us. That's an Afrofuturism, you know, connection there in those movies. All right. So that's what I mean. It's a Black aesthetic. When we think about the Harlem Renaissance, that's when Black culture found its way on the main stage of America through people like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and, you know, all the writers and musicians and artists that came during that time. And so mainstream America said, oh, this group, this race, they really do have something to offer, you know, that's intelligent, you know, that's progressive. So Afrofuturism is just pushing it even further.
Okay, let's try to get another question up here. So we have one from Leslie, says, have you seen any positive progress with the presence of African Americans in the journalism field or in media as a whole? Any positive progress by African Americans?
Absolutely. When you think about Ta-Nehisi Coates, you know, he wrote a piece for the Atlantic that, you know, just he was a journalist that about reparations that launched him into the stratosphere. And now that is in the lexicon. We're talking about reparations, whether people want to talk about it or not. It's now being talked about in a way that it had never been talked about before, you know. So he's someone that has really been an important figure in journalism. I'm just trying to search and it's, you know, many writers. Who's, you know, someone like Nathan McCall, who I'm reading right now, Octavia Butler, these folks that have written incredible works that inform us about the world that we live in. So yeah, it's a lot of progress in African American writers, great thinkers. The president of our foundation, are you familiar with Dr. Walter Grayson? Yes. Yeah, Dr. Walter Grayson. He's a leading figure in, you know, history and economic history. And he gave a dynamic talk Saturday night when the exhibit opened about Afrofuturism. So yes, it's a lot of progress. And I think, you know, society, we look at it now and, you know, it might seem a bit askew, but I think we're headed in a very good direction. I think we're trying to really get to what this country is supposed to be about. Freedom, justice, and equality for all people. And it's been people of color, particularly black people, who have made America live up to that. Those are the people that have pushed that boundary to say, wait a minute, this is what this country was founded on. You know, we have to make it apply. So yeah, it's a lot of African-American writers and great thinkers that are doing good work right now.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we maybe take one more to wrap it up. So we have Andrea says, are there any tips you'd offer journalism students when writing for the voiceless community? That's a terrific question.
You have to have empathy for people. You have to be able to empathize with someone in their situation. Not sympathetic, but empathetic. And it's a difference. You have to be passionate. You have to be honest. You have to want for people to have better. You know, that's why you want to write. You know, let me ask one of you guys, why do you want to be a journalist? Somebody answer me.
I mean, mostly because I want to be a journalist because I'm a very outgoing person like you. I like hearing people's stories, but a lot of times if you don't know somebody or if you're not connected to somebody important, your story don't get told, and I think it's unfair.
So you feel just like everybody has a story. Everybody is important. It doesn't have to do with your economic status. Yes, we all would love to have a lot of money. I would too. But everybody's story matters, and we should be empathetic to those whose stories are not being told, or these stereotypes that are being put out there nonstop about various different people and ethnic groups. All right? Until you really know someone, you should not be judging them on the stereotype that you hear or you perceive those people to be. You know, you need to know people. And that's what journalism brings you to. You have to, I wrote a story the other day, because I do work too for Detour Art Gallery. And it basically wrote itself, you know, because when you are connected like that to the subject, you feel it, right? What's your name? Imani, you feel it. And when you feel it like that, it just kind of it comes out. It comes out. It's those stories where, you know, I didn't really connect or whatever, that are the hardest ones to try to write. That's why I'm saying, really try to be honest with your subject and try to know them. In the little bit of time that you might have to be with them, try to get to know them. You know, have conversation with them. Ask them, you know, about themselves. You know, if they weren't doing this, what would they be doing? What would they like to do? All right, everybody has a dream. Some dreams are deferred, but maybe you can, you know, help them relive that dream in some way. All right, so that would be my answer.
It's a terrific way to wrap up then. So thank you very much, Gilda, for joining us tonight. Thank you for coming out. We appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
For sure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.